Let's see. Ah, we're live. Hurrah! That was painless. This week Twitch caught on immediately. I'm gonna go tell people that we are live. I've started a little bit early today, but I don't think anyone will mind. Streaming game dev, putting in physics. Alright, there we go. Now let's go ahead and do a little bit of streaming. So I did a little bit off screen. I worked on some of the things that this needs to have in order to be physicsy, and that includes things like actual movement and stuff. But none of the physics have been finalized, and so that's what we're going to do today. We should also switch over to linear color mode, which I actually don't have memorized as to how to do. Is it under graphics or quality? Don't think it's here. I don't see any color mode. Let's look at somewhere else. I should have done this off screen. I only remembered because of the way that light looked, totally bleeding out on the system. So I was just making everything bright white and without any bloom. That looks really terrible. So either add bloom or change the color mode. But I believe that we're still on a really archaic ass color mode, so it would be good for us to change it to linear. I think it's linear that we're looking to do, but I just don't see that option anywhere. I feel kind of dumb. Here it is. Linear. Boom. All right. I don't know how visible that change is going to... Yeah, that's immediately a good change. All right. So that will really help us out in the long run. And obviously I've got the light set really, really bright at the moment, but that's fine. It's just for debug purposes. So what we need to do is put in some physics. The physics for this system will be the force of the engines upon the rest of the ship. There are two kinds of forces from these engines. One are the force directly backwards, but these are going to be all-in-one engines that also have maneuvering jets built into them. I haven't put the maneuvering jets in yet, so that's going to be... I don't know if I'm going to manage to do that today, but for now we're just going to do the forces that are straight back. And in order to calculate those forces out, we're going to need to finish our physics stuff, which is much closer to being finished than you might think. For example, all of our ship is rigged up with the mass system. The mass graph can simply calculate out the graph instantly, as you can see here. And then what it needs to do is figure out in real time what sort of forces are being applied by these engines. The good news is the engines already know what sort of force they want to apply. Let me clean my glasses off. By the way, if there's anybody listening, let me know how loud that fan is in the background. I installed my my air conditioner today because it's supposed to hit 90, and it's in another room, but it kind of is loud. Alright, so we're going to pop on over to these engines. I just cleaned my glasses with my shirt after working outside all morning, and that did not make them any cleaner. Sweaty glasses, just what everybody wants to hear about on Twitch. Alright, there we go. So our rocket has a thruster script, which we can pop open here. Notice that it says that it has a physics component that we're supposed to assign. Well, there it is, so let's drag it in. Now, the reason that the physics component doesn't auto-assign is because the rotor also needs a physics component, but the rotor's controllable script is on the head of the rotor and not on the base of the rotor. So I didn't want to try and do some kind of automatic testing that would probably fail, and instead I just made it all manual. We can do these separately for the moment. It's not that expensive to just do two of them. Obviously, in the long run, these will be generated in real time, and we'll just have a prefab for these. But since we're just doing some testing right now, it's not a big deal to assign them manually. We've popped open the thruster head, and what we need to do is determine the actual amount of force being applied. Here you can see that if we can find our controller, the controller is automatically detected when possible. If we find that we have a controller, then we can look where we're trying to go according to the heading of the ship. We find our alignment, so the heading and our thrust vector, and our throttle gets set to that level. Now it should be noted that there's no limit on the throttle at the moment. It can go above 1 or below 0. So what we're probably going to want to do is have that work out a little bit more clearly. So if let's go ahead and make it so that the throttle can't go below 0. If value is less than 0, return. If value is greater than 1, I guess we can just do those at the same time, can't we? If value is less than 0 or value is greater than 1, return. The other option is we could clamp the value rather than just returning. That might be better. Value equals mathf.clamp 01 value. That way we won't throw an error and fail. We'll just go to the nearest possible thrust value, and that's valuable. Elboetchi stopped in to say hello. Hello, Elboetchi. So how's my audio? Can you hear a loud fan in the background? I think you probably can. Alright, so we've got our throttle being assigned correctly, but we do not have our force being assigned correctly. Now the force is something that is created in the physics object. So this ship control system has no concept of force, and the thruster has no concept of force, because force is something that only physics systems understand. But we do have a physics system, and you just saw me assign it earlier, depending on if you've been watching the whole time. The physics system is part of this controllable ship system. You can see that we have this component assignment right here. This we've just assigned, so we can grab that physics component with our thruster and tell it how much thrust we've got going on here. So for that, we're going to go ahead and put that here. We will grab our component. So first we got to check if component. If we do have a component, then we want to tell the component that the force is going to be a specific value. Now this is a little bit odd because there are a lot of different force-related functions, and we need to be sure we don't accidentally do something like apply force, because apply force is force that is applied to the object, and not the object applying force to the whole mass system. Instead, we assign this generated force, this frame. We assign that equal to throttle times our, that's not throttle, that's throttle. Throttle times our thrust, max thrust, times our thrust vector. There we go. The only threat here is that the update might be in the wrong order, in which case it will be off by a frame. Later on, we're going to want to make sure that we do this properly. Assign execution order, assign script execution order to make sure all of these happen on the same side of the physics calculation. I don't really care whether everything is a frame late or a frame early, but I don't want half of them to be a frame late and half of them a frame early. That would be annoying. But it's not worth worrying about right now. We'll worry about that later. Elboetchi says he can't hear my loud-ass fan. Good, because I had two options. I could either put the air conditioner 3 feet from my face, or I could put it in the other room. It's not going to cool me off very effectively over there, but at least it's not going to be 3 feet from my face. You would definitely be able to hear it, and only it, if that was the case. So what we've just done is we have told our physics object how much force it will be applying to the mass graph, this frame. So now we have to tell the mass graph to look for all of those physics objects that are applying force. And guess what? We already do that. I did some off-screen work. This is where we're going to do that here in Update. We already keep track of the anchors. Later on, we will have some very adaptive anchor systems running. involving things like auto-detecting which things are applying force and stuff like that. For now, we're just working off of the ship's anchors as they're defined. That's going to change later, though. Anyway, since we have a list of the things that might be assigning force, a list of things with force this frame, since we have a list of them, what we're going to do is we are going to just collect all their forces. Total force plus equals PC dot force this round. There we are. And that will give us the force that has been generated in this frame. Now what we need to do is propagate that full force throughout the entire system. Now you might think, oh, okay, well then you're going to be working forward from the engines, and you're going to be like, the engine applies this much force to the next guy, which applies this much force to the next guy. We actually have a mass graph, so we do it the other way around. And that's the point of the mass graph. It's extremely fast if we do it from top to bottom, and not nearly as fast if we do it bottom to top. So the whole point of the mass graph is that we can really, really rapidly assign these force values, and that's what we're going to do. But in order to do that, we have to build that system. We've got the mass graph, but we don't have the physics propagation built in yet. So in order to build that, what we do is we go through each of the mass graph nodes and tell them how much force is being applied. It doesn't matter which direction we go. All of the mass graph nodes have already been built, and they're already arranged top to bottom with cached values. So we can just go through all of the mass graph nodes and just tell them, hey, this much force has been applied. For each mass graph node in nodes, node.apply force. Notice that there isn't one yet. Don't worry, we'll go ahead and do that total force. There we are. So with that in mind, we can go on over into our mass graph node system and build that force system. So let's go ahead and put in a new region, code region, physics, calcs, and region. That's not how you spell either of those words. There we are. Public, that's not how you spell public. Come on, fingers, work it out. So we're just going to have an apply force value here with a vector3 force. Now, from the perspective of the mass graph node, what we would like to have is the magnitude of the force and the absolute, the normalized value of the force. So that's what we're going to just go ahead and break it into. Float, we'll call this force total force. We'll call this float force and make it total force dot magnitude. Elbow says, do you know of any decent free-to-use CAD software? As far as I've been gathering, open source CAD is absolute shit. So we actually have that problem a lot at work. As far as I know, there's no good CAD programs at all. But the ones that you pay for were at least good in the 90s. Trying to track down up-to-date CAD programs that feel modern and usable, like say the Maya might for 3D modeling, is actually quite a challenge because the standard CAD software has a lock grip on the industry and nobody else has stepped up to bat. We basically gave up. We stopped trying to do hardware, so we didn't really need it anymore. But the end result is we had to pay a lot of money to get a crappy CAD program, and I don't know anything about cheap ones. When I looked 3 or 4 years ago, there were no good free ones, and the expensive ones were pretty crappy too. Vector3 direction equals total force dot normalized. So with this in mind, we can quickly determine how much force, how much of our mass matters here. So when we are told to apply force of a certain amount, that force is registered as something along the lines of newtons. It's kilograms per second per second. So it's acceleration based on the mass here. We are currently not we're not calculating that out very well. So what we need to do is get the total force that's being applied to our node and not the total force being applied to the ship. This is a little bit annoying because this is a piece where I haven't gotten it really smooth yet in terms of thinking about what units to use, because the rockets apply X amount of force to the ship, but obviously each element within the ship feels a different amount of stress depending on how much mass is on that object. So right now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and denote a certain amount of practical force, or whatever you want to call it, which is going to be force times our load mass. Now, there are lots of ways to think about this, and I'm not 100% sure this is the right one. It might be better for us to assign absolute force values and stuff, but right now what we're seeing is that the engine applies a certain amount of gravities, practically speaking, and that's not quite as good as what I'd like, but we'll work this out later. To do right now, we're treating the engines as creating gravities rather than newtons. El Buechi says, I use Creo in school and have a student license, and it's buggy as hell for an industry tool. Yeah. And he won't have a student license forever, and he's trying to find a CAD system that's somewhat usable but free to use. Yeah, as I said, CAD is in a screwed up place. The real issue is there's a lot of requirements about what you have to be able to do in an industry standard CAD system. Half of them are legal and half of them are just like backwards compatibility issues. And it makes it extremely hard to program a CAD program that can compete. Because, you know, you'll get random people who are like, oh yeah, this is really easy to use. And then an industry guy will come over and say, okay, but it can't import, you know, this piece of, this document from 1998. And I can't, you know, print it in this format on this kind of paper for submission to this government agency. So it's got a lot of annoying hangers-on that make it expensive to develop, which is why it's all crap. So once we have our practical force, we can determine how much stress is on the object. And there's two kinds of stress. There is compressive stress, and then there is shearing stress. Float, shearing stress. So what we're trying to do here, we have the direction of the force because we know where our center of load is, and we know the vector of the force. So if you imagine that, you can see that if the center of load and the force are aligned with our center of mass, then all of that force is perfectly aligned with our center of mass, and it's all compressive. On the other hand, if our center of mass and our center of load are way off from each other and the vector is just kind of skewing off anywhere into space, then it's all going to be just a fractured load, a stress to try and break the system. But once we have our practical force and our stress force, we can work that out. So let's go ahead and create our shearing vector. And the shearing vector is simply the flattened version of the two vectors. So I guess what we'll do is, to make this super clear, we'll go ahead and type it up with comments. So delta load vector equals center of load minus our center of load. Get the vector from our center to the load center. But this needs to be personal center. There it is. Otherwise it will be the wrong thing. Then what we need to do is flatten that out. So shearing vector equals delta load vector dot, okay, we have to do vector 3 dot, what is it, flatten on, I'm trying to remember what this is. We could just do a dot and then invert it. So I think that what we need to do is do one of these projections. I'm trying to remember which one it is, because there's 3 different kinds of projections, and sometimes I forget which is which. There's project, project on plane, and then there's the right cross mult. I can't remember which of these is what I need. I think it's project onto plane. Yeah, it's project onto plane. That's what I need. So what we need to do is project our load vector onto our total force, onto our delta load vector. So this is a little bit iffy. This needs to be our direction or our total force. Okay, so this is our total force vector 3. This is not what we really need to have. This is supposed to be our direction. We should probably try and spell direction correctly. There we go. So what we're trying to do now is we're taking a normalized vector and we are flattening it onto the normal of our the plane defined by the normal of our load variation. And that means that if you can imagine our load beam between our center of mass and our load center of mass, if you can imagine that as like a pillar in the ground, what we're doing is we are taking any given vector coming in and we are flattening it onto the ground and losing the z-axis so that we can just see how far from the center of our balance that would be. And the smaller this resulting shearing vector is, the less shearing load we're going to have, because it's going to be nicely balanced on top of us. Of course, 0 being the best. So we're just going to go ahead and do a debug.log for this. Shearing vector, and then we'll give it the shearing vector. And we'll go ahead and do a debug.log over here. Debug.log. Total force applied. Total force. All right, so with this in mind, let's just go ahead and see whether or not it's keeping up with what's in my head. It doesn't look like it is, because we're not getting any comments about whether or not it is doing these things. The mass graph is on, and it should be executing. So why didn't this... Oh, if anchors.count equals 0, is that what the problem is? Debug.log, no anchors in mass graph. Yeah, I might have forgotten to set... No, the anchors are set up properly. Okay, so now we're getting lots of comments. No anchors in mass graph. All right, so it looks like we might be setting up the anchors wrong. If we take a look up at our calculation system, where we calculate the mass graph, you can see that we set the anchors to clear, and then we add our target's anchors. Down here, we say tier equals calculate tier, but the calculated tier results are new. So this isn't overwriting the anchors. It shouldn't be at any rate. Let's go ahead and put in a log. Debug.log, calculated mass graph with anchors.count. Anchors. Now if we take a look up here, calculated mass graph with 0 anchors. This must be screwing it up somehow. Let's go ahead and just double check. Calculating mass graph with some amount of anchors. Okay, so if we take a look, here it says calculated with 0, and up here it says calculating with 2. So it looks like we are, in fact, overwriting that that list, which is quite odd. I did not realize that was what was going to happen. So we'll just go ahead and do this differently. New list component, blah, anchors. Alright, so that should keep us from losing that list. I don't really know where I'm overwriting it, but if we take a look, you can see that we now have shearing vectors being noted, which is not too bad. And you can see that they're all 0 at the moment because we're not applying any force. If we were to clear this and then apply some force, now when we take a look at the bottom, you can see that we have a shearing vector of 0.4, -2, -2, 0.4, -1, -2, -1, 1. So we're calculating out a bunch of cool shearing vectors. In this case, the total force being applied on the global scale, on the global axis, is mostly along the z-axis, which makes sense. We're mostly going forward. And that means that all of this shearing calculation is based on these engines. And that seems to be working. So now what we need to do is put in some actual physics. At the moment, we don't have any concept of how durable these physics objects are. So what we're going to do is we are going to pass all of the physics objects within our mass graph node the information that they're going to need. So for each physics object or physics component in contains, what we need to do is tell it what sort of load it's getting. Now the issue with this is the connections are not being monitored very carefully. So we're going to have to think about that. 10Chaos1 says, what's being made today then? I am setting up the actual physics part of this physics simulation. I'm doing it kind of while talking aloud, so I'm not 100% sure that I'm doing it correctly. I've already done it twice, but it's one of those things where I'm implementing it in a different way, so I'm not 100% sure how it works. So what we're going to do is we're going to do apply force, and then we're going to pass it all of the force that it's going to need, which includes the force and the shearing vector. That should be enough for it to determine the actual amount of practical force, I guess. That should be enough for it to determine the actual amount of stress on the object. So if we do that, we can change our physics component to have a physics region. Here's the apply force. You can see that it has a vector 3 force. It needs to have a float force and a vector 3 shearing normal. Or shearing, yeah, it's a shearing vector, not a shearing normal. That should allow us to specify how much force it's taking. Oh, I just closed it, god damn it. No, that's not there. That should allow us to specify how much force it is taking and how much shearing damage it will be taking. So with that in mind, we need to know how strong these things are, and there you can see we've got compressive strength and connection strength. Those are the two values we're going to be using. If force is greater than compressive strength, then we're going to take force damage. So debug.log force compression damage taken plus force minus compression strength. And then down here we will say, oh, I need to put in my name. Name plus takes compressive damage. And then here we can say if force times shearing vector dot magnitude is greater than shearing strength. No, it's called connection strength. Debug.log, same thing, but with shearing damage. Force times shearing vector dot magnitude, and there we are. And that should tell us whether or not we are taking damage. We definitely need to disable some of these debug logs because they are very, very loud. So with this in mind, we can see that we have some damage being taken. Now this is completely unbalanced, so it makes sense that everybody's taking damage. But you can see that some things are taking more damage than others. So the beam straight is taking 1,099 damage, and the rotor 3 is taking 1,500 compressive damage. The rotor shouldn't be taking much compressive damage. Oh, I guess it is, directly on the rotor head. Yeah. Huh. That's true. It is taking compressive damage. I got so used to thinking of the rotors in terms of shearing, I forgot that, yeah, you can be straight onto a rotor. Once it's tilted, it might be different, but these engines are directly at the rotor head, so they're not going to be producing any wobble force because they're pointed straight at the rotor. But the rotor is taking a tremendous amount of compressive damage in both cases. They're taking the same amount of damage, which is a good sign. You can see their compressive strength is only 10, when it should be more like 50 if we're going to try and do these things properly. But that said, these values are way out of link. The actual amount of damage being assigned is extraordinarily high. It's in the thousands when all of the other values we're using are like 5, 50, 10. So in order to prevent that from being really bad, we are going to need to have some kind of moderation here, where those values actually sync up rather than being hundreds of magnitudes off from each other. And right now the problem is that the resistance is being specified in masses, or newtons rather, and the masses are also being specified in kilograms or whatever, and that means that when you have a load of these guys, you're going to need a really, really high compressive and connection strength, much higher than the mass of the object. So our options are, we can either specify very, very high compression and connective strengths, or we can just assume that those are in other units, like say hundreds of newtons. That's probably better for us in this case, just because otherwise it is a little bit over the top in terms of the numbers. Yeah, for now we'll go ahead and just assume that those are in hundreds of newtons. We can even have like a difficulty meter that we can adjust, the player can adjust to determine how much compressive strength and stuff is, what the multiple is. And a lower multiple would be a much harder game with much more fragile spaceships. So what we're going to do is, when we apply force to the mass graph node, we're just going to divide it by 100. And you can see now the damage that we're taking is like 10, 5, not thousands, which is expected because we reduced these values quite a lot. And if we take a look, the things that are taking damage aren't really the main core elements anymore. The beam is taking a small amount of damage, which is a little surprising. You can see that our debug logic is a little bit broken. The visuals are a little bit broken. We can fix that in a little bit here. But the I think that these are not properly distributing their weight. So these shouldn't be taking much damage. There's not much weight on them. I'm trying to figure out why the beam is taking... Oh, this isn't... Sorry, I was thinking it was these guys. These are the beam straight and the beam taper. These guys are the beams. Yeah, these beams should be taking a fair amount of compressive damage because they have the weight of the entire engine's thrust on them propagating up through the ship. All right, that's fine. So the other thing that we would like to do is when we are calculating out this stuff, we want to make sure that, let's go ahead and change it over from being engines that do gravities to being engines that actually exert force. So float total mass equals 0 for each. We can actually get that cached, can't we? Oh, let's just go ahead and calculate it out for now. For each mass graph node, node in nodes, total mass plus equals node dot mass, person mass. There we are. and that'll get us the total mass. And then what we can do is we can divide this total force, divide by total mass, and that'll give us the actual amount of pressure being exerted on the ship by the engines. This will end up obviously dropping the amount of force involved to a much more reasonable level. So we'll get rid of this little hack we did last time. And we'll take a look. All right, so that's more like what I was looking to see. The engines are no longer applying a flat gravitic force. They're now applying a force which is balanced across the ship based on the ship's mass. So if you have something that does 1 Newton of thrust and your ship weighs 100 kilograms, you will end up with 0.01 seconds of acceleration, meters per second of acceleration, and that will be nice. That's much more believable, and it means that as your ship gets heavier, it will move slower, which is good. The amount of damage that you'll take is not going to change. If you have a thruster at 100% thrust and that is producing 100,000 newtons of force, then it doesn't matter whether your ship weighs 1 kilogram or 1,000 kilograms, the amount of newtons on the ship is the same. So as your ship mass goes up, you're going to need more engines to move faster, but more engines means more force, and that will definitely cause you to have to balance this stuff out. Right now, however, we have this issue where our mass graph node is not calculating out the exact sorts of damage that we want to take. We are calculating out the fact that we're taking either compressive damage or shearing damage, but the problem is that we don't know what connections are suffering that shearing damage. For example, this thing here, this I-beam that's bent, is connected to several objects. It's connected to the rotor, it's connected to the armor plate, and it's connected to the engine. When we are calculating out the amount of stress on this beam, we need to know where that center of mass is in comparison. And if it's coming down from this ship here, it's going to be ending up, it's going to go through the rotor, and we're going to be ending up with this massive skew this direction. Because you can see that, right? There's this huge lump of matter right here, and we're over here. So obviously the center of mass is going to be over here somewhere. That will end up putting a lot of pressure on this connection, but it won't end up putting any pressure on the other connections. Now the way that that's being calculated out is rather simple. This has a higher tier value. So we can track down where our load center of mass is and stress only the connections that have a higher tier value. Now, in some very complicated situations, we may end up with this being inadequate, but for now it should work. Apply shearing damage to connections of a higher tier level. We need to, when we send this apply force, we need to actually tell it to give us a mass graph or a mass graph node, just because otherwise we're going to lose track of what's going on in terms of figuring out where our connections are. But that should be okay. So before we do that, let's go ahead and finish off the compressive force, and then we'll do the shearing force separately. So the compressive force, we're going to go ahead and have a compressive strain counter. And that's going to be valuable for us. Public force compressive strain equals 0. What we're going to do is we're going to add to this compressive strain when we take compressive damage, and then only when it exceeds that value will the block itself start to suffer damage. Basically, once this compressive strain reaches some multiple of our compressive strength, it will break. So let's go ahead and say public float compressive damage equals 0. So we won't start taking damage until our strain is high enough, and once our damage is high enough, we will break. But what we're going to want to do is put in a better onDraw gizmos. We've got this thing where we draw in the links. We're now going to want to draw in the damage. So if compressive strain is greater than 0, then we want to gizmos.color. It's already yellow, so that's fine. We're going to want to draw a wireframe sphere around our center, and with a radius equal to our compressive strain divided by 10. Let's call it compressive strain divided by compressive strength. So this will give us a value between 0 and 1, and we can just say 5 times this. And that way we'll get a value where a sphere size of 5 is going to be our maxed out compression. Let's go ahead and change the color. Gizmos.color equals, so float strain percent equals compressive strain divided by compressive strength. And this is going to be something on the order of 0 to 1,000,000. And so we're going to want to draw a color based on that. So gizmos.color equals color.yellow. So let's go ahead and color C equals color.yellow. We'll go ahead and make this new color 1F, 0F. And then what we'll do is we will subtract out the second component there, the green component, based on our strain percent. So C.green minus equals mathf dot cap. What's it called? Clamp. Oh, clamp 01, yeah. Strain percent. There we go. And that way we'll get to know how close we are to the limit of the strain. And down here we'll get a 0 to 5. The 5, it might be considerably bigger than 5 if we are taking damage. But if we're not taking damage, then that'll be fine. And over here we'll say if compressive damage is greater than 0, then we're going to want to do the exact same thing, but with an opaque sphere. Why is this red? Oh. All right. So that should work, right? Oh, these need redefining? Okay. I undefined them because I thought that was what the error was. But apparently not. Why are you still erroring? Oh. All right. So I don't know how I made so many typing mistakes there, but I did. So now we can tell what the compressive strain and the compressive damage are going to be. So the problem with this is, of course, that we're not resetting the compressive strain at all. So up here, we need to decide whether or not our compressive strain is going to be decreased. So if our compressive force is low, our compressive strain is relieved. And that means that we're just going to go ahead and subtract our compressive strain minus equals force minus compressive strength minus force. If compressive strain is less than 0, compressive strain equals 0. There we go. And that way we'll be able to relieve our force. But for now, we need to also have a compressive strain that adds into our force. So force minus compressive strength. There we go. So we don't calculate out damage yet, but we're going to go ahead and do that. If compressive strain is greater than, oh, I guess we should do that up here in update. If compressive strain is greater than compressive strength, compressive damage plus equals compressive strain minus compressive strength. All right, that should get us to understand kind of what sort of forces we're going to be seeing here. And if we were to pause, you can see that I'm not sure why this looks so dark. Oh, we're in a shadow. We're under a shadow. That's fine, but I can't see any gizmos about how much compressive strain we're taking, even though I have detailed information on the fact that we are, in fact, taking it. Look, our compressive strain is incredibly high. We should have already broken. Is it just... Oh. It's just so big that, that we can't see through it. Let's go ahead and say that here our compressive strain is relieved down to our compressive strength. That way we won't have cataclysmic fall-offs like that. And we're also going to go ahead and say if compressive damage is greater than compressive strength, compressive damage equals compressive strength. But this is really us breaking. Alright, so if we take a look here, you can see that we're getting all of our stress and strain damage back here at the back end, which is not a surprise at all. What is a surprise is that our armor plates are taking strain damage. The reason that our armor plates are taking strain damage is because they're being considered as part of the same island as the I-beam. So basically, the beam here is taking as much strain as everything else. I'm not sure that's what I want. I may go back. See, islands are a massive time saver, but in this case the problem is that this beam shouldn't be part of, well, it's attached to the engine is the thing. It should be part of the island, but it shouldn't be taking any compressive strain because it's not connected upwards. Yeah. What I forgot is when we're calculating out these mass graph nodes, we are calculating out only the one that's only applied to the ones that have a connection upwards, which makes sense. This is actually going to be our connect upwards thing. But in order to check out whether we're connected upwards, we need to check all of our connections for a connection to a mass graph node above us. To do that, we're going to go ahead and create a new value here. We'll go ahead and put it on the mass graph node because it's a mass graph node function. Region graph cycling stuff in region. Public bool connects upwards physics object, we don't even need to do it like that. We can just pass it in the physics connections, right? So with those links, which are right, yeah, right here, that's a list. That's not a big deal. I can change it to a list. What we're going to do is we're going to go through our various upward connections and see whether or not any of those guys are in them. So for each mass graph node in links upwards, if node.contains but we don't have a list of links. Those links are not just objects, so we need to do a for each links physics component link in links. If node.contains link.a or node.contains link.b, Sorry, I got my order of operations all screwed up here with my parentheses everywhere. All right, so that should work, except for node.contains.contains. There we are. So that will tell us whether or not there is an object in our links that is connected to an object above us, return true. Otherwise, return false. That quick little kind of operation is something that you want to minimize. So we probably want to cache it. We probably want to keep track of which physics objects are connected upwards and which aren't, just so that we don't have to calculate this every frame for every object. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to create a new value, a new variable, which is going to be, what do you want to call it? Connect, what do you call it? Supports, connects, links, connections up. And what we're going to do is we are going to calculate that out only when we don't have a when we don't have that calculated out yet. So here I'm trying to figure out the best place to do this. Well, let's go ahead and create a new function called finalize. And in this function, we will go ahead and determine which things need to be put into our connections up. What was it called? Connections up? For some reason, it's not auto-correcting. And then what we'll do is we will go through all of them and do them more accurately using our connects upwards thing here. For each physics component PC in contains, if connects upwards pc.links, then we add it to connects upwards. And what we do is down here when we're applying the force vector, we only go through our connects upwards, and that will keep things from being incorrectly assigned. The mass graph islands exist to propagate force downwards, not to propagate force onto themselves. So they didn't contain any information on which elements within them were going to be supporting weight. They only contained information on which elements within them were going to be providing mass. So for that, we have now fixed this. Over here in the physics component, we can go back into this system. I don't believe that we have any problems that we need to resolve because we didn't do anything half implemented over here. Let's go ahead and take a look. Connects up. Connections up. This is why it would be really nice if you could autofill. My guess is that monodevelop is desynced. We'll just close it down. The name connections up doesn't exist in the current system because it's spelled with 3 N's. Yeah, there we are. Let's go ahead and spell it with 2 N's, and that way it won't be stupid. The finalize method can interfere with the okay, so we're going to call this finalize graph. And we need to go over here into the mass graph and actually have it do that at the end of our calculation. So here's our calculate mass graph. We're going to go through and do for each mass graph node in nodes, node.finalize graph. That ought to do. Let's try it out. So we should see some compressive damage now, and you can see that we're no longer seeing compressive damage on our armor plates. See? Wait, they are still maxed out. That's interesting. Why are they maxed out? These guys are also have suffered no damage because they're not being no problems with them. But these guys are still suffering damage. That implies that there is a connection upwards that's being discovered. Let's go ahead and calculate this out. And take a look at our connections and see. Oh, they're not serializable, so I can't actually see them. We could put information in here about them, but so what we're looking at is this gray bubble here. This gray bubble here should have both the I-beam and the armor plate in it because they're both connected to the engine. But only the I-beam should take forces coming in. The plate isn't part of that deal. So what we're going to do is add in some debugging and see whether or not we can track down what's going on here. Debug.log pc.name plus connects up. All right, there we go. So if we can take a look at our connects up lines here, armor plate 1 connects up. You bastard. So for some reason this is returning a connection. The connects upwards here takes a look through all of the nodes that we connect up to and determines whether or not they contain either one of the elements in the link. Now it's possible that this is somehow triggering on itself because I don't test whether link A or link B is the object that we care about. So what we're going to do is we're just going to put in a debug.log mass graph node. So tier contains, and then we'll do a link.a.name or link.b.name. And let's see whether or not we can track down exactly what it thinks of us. Is my mic dropping down? Oh, squeaky. There we are. So if we take a look, we can now try and figure out what's going on. So here it says tier 1 contains armor plate or rocket. That is true. Tier 1 does contain it. And therefore, well, it shouldn't be looking at tier 1. It should be looking at tier 2. Tier 1 is the tier that the armor plate is on. Obviously, it cannot upwardsly connect to itself. That's ridiculous. So let's go ahead and just take a look here. If node.tier equals tier debug.log error, hey, there's a cyclical bug in your graph. Now let's go ahead and see whether or not there's a cyclical bug in our graph. I don't see any cyclical bugs in our graph. So the question is, when the rocket connects up, it's detecting those things. So let's go ahead and just change this a little bit. Oh, but this isn't, sorry, this is actually supposed to be node.tier. That explains it. I was having a problem because it was the wrong thing in the debug message. There we are, much better. So we're taking a look for the armor plate here. The armor plate is connected to the rocket and the beam. It's not connected to the rotor. The rocket is a connection down, and the beam is a connection to the same connection. If we take a look at things that have rockets and beams, Zero contains armor plate or rocket. Do I have them just reversed? I do. I just have them reversed. I'm trying to find links down, I guess. This is a little bit odd. Did I get them reversed in my head when I was building it? Ups and downs? It's likely, I guess. So let's take a look here. The armor plate is undamaged. Okay, so that was correct. I had the wrong one. Everything else is critically damaged because none of the weights have been balanced or anything. Let's go ahead and increase their durability here. And these guys can actually have a pretty high compressive strength. I was leaving it low just while we were debugging, but the truth is that armor is not so bad. That might be a little high. But basically, armor is built to withstand direct hits, so obviously it's got a little bit of durability to it. So when we have done that, then what we end up with is only these rockets having been damaged. So the last thing we need to do is upgrade these rockets. Now obviously the compressive strength of a rocket, you don't generally try and crush a rocket, but we're talking about the ability for it to withstand physics links into its primary structure. That is to say, the physics casing around the rocket, which is built to withstand the entire force of the rocket. So it's got a lot of compressive strength. It's going to have no connection strength, though, because it's intended to only fire straight. So now, when we're at max speed, max force, we do suffer some damage. What is that, the rotor? Yeah, the rotor is taking damage, which actually makes sense. I'm pretty happy about the idea of the rotors taking damage, but I think that their compressive strength is a little bit low. So let's go and raise it up a little bit here. Obviously, we're using only debug information when it comes to trying to determine how much damage things are taking. Later on, we'll put in visuals that can be seen by the player. Here you can see that we aren't really suffering any damage even at full thrust, which is good, because this ship is not heavy enough that it should be suffering any kind of actual damage. That's fine. There are a couple of issues that I have, though. One of which is I believe that our mass graph is not properly splitting mass between two different forked supports. I can easily check that. We can just go over into the mass graph and look it up. Pink Air says, what's all this? Procedural ship hierarchy? It's a mass graph. So basically, I calculate out the amount of mass at any given connective tier of the ship, and then I can instantly calculate out how much force is affecting any given object when forces are applied by anything on the ship. In this case, we're talking about engine forces. So that means that I'll be able to build ships that can really, really rapidly simulate the pressures of acceleration or running into something or anything else I need to simulate. That means that we'll be able to do a lot of gameplay that's not really possible. If you've ever played something like Space Engineers and you know how the rotors fail to work, well, this takes care of that. This is a method that will completely make rotors work free. They'll be very, very close to free. We'll be able to calculate at their max stress levels, move them, all that stuff, without any sort of strain or complex physics chaining in the game world. But first we have to get there, and we're a little bit shy on a couple of values here. So when we calculate out the tiers, we do connect up these islands, but we don't ever add up. Here, we calculate out the tiers. See this? We connect up these islands, but we never actually distribute their loads properly. That's something that's going to bite us in the ass, because it basically means that if you have two supports, like say two rotors supporting the center of the ship, like this guy, if you've got this kind of split where there's two rotors and the engines are behind the rotors, this actually makes the mass of the body double, because we're not properly dividing the mass so that it will flow properly. It's easy to specify it like that, but it's not being calculated at the moment. So here is where we are doing these calculations. We do these node links up, links down from blah, 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 blah. What we're going to need to do is figure out the load based on how many connections there are to a given island. The problem is that we're not calculating out how many connections there are to a given island. We're just doing add load node 0. So basically, we're finding all of the nodes below us, and we're just adding our mass to them. What we should be doing is splitting our mass so that it is a little bit better than that. So what we're going to do here is split mass between our connections. If node 0.linksup.count is less than or equal to 1, now it's equal to 0, continue, no supports. If node 0.linksup.count equals 1, then node 0.linksup0 add load node. Else, split our load between our supporters. Now right now add load is being set up with only the node in mind, see? But what we need to be able to do is specify the values as well. So right now this just takes the mass and the whole setup of that node. We also want to be able to specify that. So here we can just take it in manually. There you go. That allows us to modify the apparent mass and center of mass of our various islands. So what we're going to do is we're just going to evenly split for now. Later on we might change this. We're going to easily split the mass between our various supporters. So mass divided by node 0.linksup.count. But we also need to figure out our center of support and then use that to split our center of mass. This is a hand wave which allows us to do simulations much more forgivingly if you use supports. Otherwise, it would just be like adding in a support would just create a tremendous amount of shearing pressure and the whole thing would explode. By faking it like this, we can get it to behave reasonably realistically, certainly reasonably enough for a spaceship game. Vector 3 center of support equals vector 3.0. And what we're going to do is we are going to walk through all of the supports and add together their center of mass and the personal center of mass, and that will be where our center of support is. So for each mass graph node are we inside the wrong node here? We are inside the wrong node. Sorry, you need to be outside of this for each. There we are. So here we say for each mass graph node, node 1 in node 0.linksup. And we go ahead and we say center of support plus equals node 0 or node 1 dot personal center of mass. And then at the end we just divide it by the links count. We can probably do a little bit of just a tiny bit of optimization here. because counting is not expensive, but there's no reason to do it over and over and over. As far as I know, the count isn't actually cached anywhere, which means that every time we ask it to count it, it actually goes out and counts it. So if you do it a lot in a row like this, it's probably worth storing that value so that we don't have to just continually search for it over and over and over again. So with that in mind, we now have our center of support, and what we can do is we can find the offset from the center of support and the support that we're looking at. So for each, same here. With each of these nodes, this is a supporting pillar. And what we're going to do is we're going to determine how far from the center of support this supporting pillar is. Center of support, it's node 1 dot personal center of mass minus center of support. That gives us an offset that tells us how far we are from the total center of support. What we're going to want to do is move the center of mass that's coming in based on that value. So where the center of mass isn't relevant. Where the center of support is what's relevant. And that means that for things which are heinously off to the side, you're going to end up getting a lot of stress and a very little actual useful support. So we're going to go ahead and just take that support delta and make that our new center of mass offset. So we say node 1 dot add load, and then we pass it in the mass, so mass, and we pass it in the center of mass for node 0 plus the support delta. Now I think that might be a minus rather than a plus. I think it's right. I think it's right. So there we have it. We have our way of splitting it between two bifurcated supports. I've tested this out a couple of times, so if you didn't understand that, it's probably because I'm just talking backwards over something I did a couple weeks ago. I can explain it in more detail if you're curious, but it's not as complicated as I've made it sound, because I'm just mumbling into the microphone rather than explaining things. Brilliant, right? So what we need to do next is take the physics component and fix its diagramming. Mass graph node, here it is. So in the mass graph node, when we're drawing, sorry, it's the mass graph itself. When we're drawing the load mass here, you see we are drawing it screwed up. The wire sphere for the load center of mass isn't being properly drawn. If we take a look here, you can see it working. I guess we have to accelerate a little bit first. So if you take a look, the dark patches are the center of mass calculations, and if we let the system continue to process forward, just move forward a little bit. Oh, I screwed that up, didn't I? You can see that we just leave them behind. So the question is whether or not that is a visual bug, or whether or not the load center of masses are actually being screwed up. The answer is that the load center of masses are actually being screwed up. This happens because they are not stored as a relative value. They're stored as an absolute value. And that's not really what we want. We do want them as a relative value. So when we tell someone what their load center of mass is, we're going to want that center of mass to be relative to our center of mass. So that's on the mass graph node, add load. Yeah. So here is where we just take the load center of mass and our load center of mass. We're going to want to go ahead and make that relative. Load.com minus personal com. There we are. And we'll do the same thing here. Now, another thing that means is that when we are doing the physics offsets and applying this force here, we don't need to subtract our personal comm because our personal comm has already been subtracted. So this is already done. All right, now let's see whether or not, oh, I forgot to actually update the drawing function because now we need to actually offset it with our node.personal center of mass. Or we can just say center, can't we? I'm a little bit worried that the personal center of mass is also going to get screwed up. This is something I haven't done before, so this is going to take some doing and thinking to get it to work right. But you can see that our center of masses are being displayed properly, except for the small fact that they don't make any sense, but they're actually marching along with us now. The problem is that they have this massive Z offset that doesn't make any goddamn sense. Let's go ahead and start that simulation over. Yeah, even from a standstill, the load center of mass is being detected as massively off center. So the question is whether or not that is where that bug is happening. There's a lot of things that bug could be. We're going to go ahead and in our center of mass calculations here, when we add the load, we're going to ask it to tell us what it thinks is going on. Public void, or sorry, debug.log split load found added, and then we'll pass it in vector3.com. Oh, sorry, just the com. Relative to personal com. And we'll see whether or not that value is as wrong as the display says it is. We're also going to comment this out. So split load found added -2 0.09 relative to -2 0 -1.4. So I happen to know where the split loads are. They are right here where the load splits. These are split load objects, and what it's telling us is that the offset is the load offset is at 0.9 relative to our center of mass, which is at -1.4. That's a little bit odd because our center of mass and their center of mass should be on the same Z level. Oh wait, this is the Z level, isn't it? And this is the Z axis. So, yeah, so that's correct. This is correct. Our load of 0.9 is here, and the Z load is not in the same exact Z position as we are. It's either ahead of us or behind us by, it looks like 0.5 Z, which makes perfect sense. There's stuff on the body of the ship. It's not perfectly aligned with us. That's fine. That means that our center of mass should actually be like here-ish. However, when we're drawing it way offset. So it looks like the center of masses might be just being drawn wrong because those are the correct locations. Let's go ahead and see whether or not we can get that to be a little bit more distinctive. So here in the mass graph, when we tell it to draw gizmos and we tell it to draw our load mass, what we end up doing is telling it to draw the load center of mass plus our center. It's possible that that is going to end up being wrong, but what I'd like to do is debug and log it. Load offset is node.loadcom. We're going to want to, this is the mass graph. It's just going to go through every node and then tell it. So we're going to go to tier, node.tier plus node load offset is. There we are. That'll let us determine a little bit about which node it is. So here you can see it's telling us what the node offsets are. The 0 node is our rocket. And that means that the rocket has an offset of -4 and 8. That does make sense. It's supposed to be -4 and 8. But when it's actually being drawn, it's being drawn as -4 and 8. Is that... Yeah, it looks like the x-axis is being drawn as the z-axis or something. It's certainly not in the same arrangement as it should be. But to be honest, I don't. That's a lot of z. That's like or y rather. That's a tremendous amount of y. That's more than 8 units of y. How many units of y is that? Well, this is 10 units. So that looks like it's another 10 units. Do I add to the offset at some point? What's going on here? Why is this so far off of the center? Oh, center already includes the offset, you idiot. So that was all a display bug. I am so smart. SMRT. Much better. All right, now we can actually see what's going on. And you can see that if we look at the rockets, this is really hard to see on Twitch, I'm sure. There is this black beam going over here into this white area. I think what we're going to want to do is change all of this stuff over to being a lot more visually, making sense visually. We've got a couple of things that are being drawn that are super opaque, like this draw sphere. We're going to change this over into a draw wire sphere. And that's the personal mass of the object. But down here we have another wire sphere, which is this dark offset, this dark mass. What we would really like to do is make this wire sphere. I'm tempted to make it opaque, but then we'll have a lot of overlapping opaque spheres. I guess having them all as wire spheres is probably the best bet for the moment. We're going to make some kind of in-world visualization of this eventually, but for now let's go ahead and just take a look at what we've got here. So you can see that what we have is a reasonably accurate visual of the ship. And if you look into it, you can see that there are offset center of masses here. Now the problem is that if we take a look, the black beam coming out of this goes all the way up into the heart of the ship. It really shouldn't. Let's go ahead and make it not black, because it's almost impossible to see. Let's make it orange. Is there no orange? Green. We'll make it green. We're trying to just figure out... We don't actually need to hit play to see this. I just need to recalculate the mesh. So we got all of these spheres here. I think that it's a bad idea to actually have those load spheres. Let's go ahead and just get rid of the wire spheres for the mass. They make it impossible to see. So now we can actually see what's going on. And you can see that these actually cross over to the other side of the ship, which is obviously dumb. So it looks like there might be a bug in how those load offsets are being defined. Unless I'm just calculating it wrong. Yeah, the load center of masses should get closer and closer, not further and further. So if you take a look at the rotors here, their load center of mass is straight forward, which is exactly what I would expect. However, if we then look back at the I-beam, the I-beam's center of load is actually further to the right. Where did it get that? How did it get moved? How did it move that far to the right? And then we come back here to the rocket, it's even further to the right. What should happen is it should be moving ever so slightly to the left. It's moving forward as well. It shouldn't be able to move forward. So it looks like I've got a bug in how the masses are currently being calculated. If we take a look here, the 0 node offset is 4 and 8. That would be this guy here. Whereas the 1 node offset is 2 and 3. That would be this guy. And the 2 node offset is 0 and 2.3, which is this guy. This one is correct, but all of the others are wrong. And I honestly don't know why. That looks like it's right. That's, I can't even see that one. Is that? That's a short forward center. That one makes sense because it's got the fuel tank on the back as well, so that's all balanced properly. It looks like the only thing that's really screwing up is back here. But I'm not sure why that would screw up. Why would that screw up? Well, let's go ahead and recalculate them all and just take a look here. It's definitely the same bug. What could be causing this issue? So, when we receive the load center of mass, we subtract our center from it. And that's all I can think of being an issue. It's got to be that our center is somehow screwing this up, but that doesn't make any sense because our center is right here. If we take a look, this is the personal center of mass plus an offset, which is 10 up, so we can see it. So what we should be seeing here is our offset when we add in our, let's go ahead and take a look here. We go up here, we take a look at our total mass for a mass graph node. So that's this. The mass center of mass is the lerp of the personal comm and the load comm with the load mass divided by the total mass. That should be correct. That means that if the load mass is 90% of our overall mass, which is the load mass plus our own mass, then it's 90% of the way to where the load center of mass is as opposed to our center of mass. The personal center of mass is defined as all the physics components we contain. We do contain an armor block. Maybe I shouldn't be subtracting the center of masses here. This is a tough call. Trying to figure this out, and I don't think I'm going to figure it out on camera because I am sort of hitting my head against the physics that I have designed, and I'm just kind of talking about it rather than thinking about it. Fundamentally, we're getting close. These are bugs, not serious issues. At worst, we do store the load center of mass as a fixed system. But what we can also do here is when we are passing these values in here, our shearing vector, we can calculate out a shearing vector based on each individual object rather than on our own center of mass. But that's not going to change anything except for the damage calculations. The mass node graph itself is what's displaying this incorrect offset. So when this here passes back to this, it says the total amount of mass you need to support is my mass, located right here, and my load's mass, located up here. This guy says, okay, I hear that, I can support those, and it somehow thinks that they're further to the right. That's further to the right than they are. I honestly don't know why it thinks that they are further to the right, because that would make perfect sense if it were locked here. Let's go ahead and add in another debug. I didn't mean to press play. Let's go ahead and add in another debug line here. I just screwed that up. Because I think that what might be happening is that it might not understand, might not be calculating out its final mass. So what we're going to do here is create another one, which will be gold, or yellow. And it's going to be our mass, just our center of mass. And in theory, that should link up with the green bar from the next guy. So here you can see that this is definitely the problem. So if we look at the node here, you know, it's really hard for me to see with the spherical wire sphere here. So we're going to go ahead and exchange that for a much, much smaller wire sphere. Just so that I can actually see what's going on. There we are. So here you can see that I actually can't tell which guy this is from. It must be from our rotor. So our rotor says that our center plus our load center is over here. Which is wrong, but it's also wrong in the wrong direction. What? Hey Morse Amalgam, I'm fighting with physics bugs. It may not be the most interesting day. We're going to go ahead and move this down. And the reason for that is because we're going to want to just see whether or not the system works at any point. Here you can see that the system works. So this guy weighs 10 and this guy weighs 10. So that means that this yellow bar should be halfway between them. It should be directly here. But instead, it's floating above the system. It's floating up here. It shouldn't be doing that. The yellow line should be connecting to directly here. We shouldn't even be able to see the yellow line. It should be like this yellow line, which you cannot really see. Well, that one you can see now, but previously you couldn't see it. But you can see that none of these yellow lines are correctly lining up with the green, with the center of mass from the previous object. This should be just a line that stops halfway between, but instead it's doing something strange. So there's lots of things we can do to try and debug this, and I think that the right option is to drag all of this shit out of the ship. Why did you only find one object? You should have found two. Well, let's go ahead and see what happens here. These guys shouldn't be here. They're not in the ship, so Why is the ship... Let's go ahead and move the ship just a little bit here. Oh! I left the main camera in. I meant to leave the reactor in. The main camera is not a physics object. Alright, let's try that again. Now, this mass graph is going to screw up because it doesn't have any anchors. We're going to go ahead and make the beam taper the anchor. There we go. So that is our 1 unit graph. We can play around with this, and we won't have to worry about getting spammed with 800 million things. So what we're going to do is just take a look at all of the various parameters and why they're screwing up. I know that this is definitely the most fun kind of stream, the debugging stream. Now, if I'd set this up right, I would be able to pause and look at these values in real time using break lines. That might be something I can do. So we're going to go ahead and try it out, try it on for size here, and see whether or not that break line actually breaks. It does not. So I don't have it set up right to do any breaking, unfortunately. So that means that we're not going to be able to do it that way, and we're going to have to instead just do some debug statements. I'm not against debug statements, so that's fine. Debug.log load mass versus center of mass is load mass plus mass, or load mass versus total mass. And we're going to have to put in the tier here. All right, there we go. Clear that and just tell it to calculate. So here it says 1 load mass versus total mass is 0 out of 10. That's for this guy up here, and that's obviously correct. There is no load on something that is at the edge like that. And here it says 0 load mass versus total mass is 10 out of 20. And you can see that it says that a lot. So that should be correct. 10 out of 20 means that it's half the front tank and half this guy, which means that the actual vector should be halfway between the two. So isn't there supposed to be a green line here? Let's go ahead and continue our debugging. We're going to go ahead and personal com, load com. Oh, there's the problem. Load com is relative. Well, that actually means that we don't have to do this. We can just go ahead and load com is relative. So this is not the right way. And instead, what we're just going to do is return personal com plus load com times load mass divided by mass. When I changed load com over to being relative, I forgot to change everything else over to being relative. So it was all confused. All right, so that's even more wrong. Okay, so just to check, that yellow line is where the node center of mass is, where we consider our own center of mass to be. And then there's this line, which is where, let's go ahead and draw a wire sphere here. Just a small one. And then another one down here. Oh, just so that we can see where they are when they're being drawn on top of each other. Because I think that one of the issues is that I can't see the green. So we're going to go ahead and... Where's the green? Let's change the size of these. By the way, the reason it keeps disappearing is because the mass graph node is not something that can be serialized. So I have to recalculate it every time there is a change. That's fine though, it's not a big deal. It's not intended to be serializable. It's just a quick little thing, a quick little math operation that gets cached. So this is where we consider our center of load to be. That's correct. Our center of load is the thing that is on top of us. That's fine. The question is, why the hell is this guy way the hell over here? Because we're adding in the center. This is not relative. You fucking idiot. There we are. All right. So that was all a visual bug. Man, everything we've done today has just been visual bugs, which I'm sure has been very rewarding for those of you who just put me on in the background to listen to my voice and don't, in fact, look at the screen. And you're like, so he was drawing something in the wrong place for the past hour? Yes. Yes, I was drawing something. Sorry. So what we're going to do is it all connected up? Yeah. We're going to go ahead and put those rockets back in as our anchors. Boom and boom. And then we'll calculate out the mass graph. There we go. That's much better. All right, so now we can see this is what the mass graph actually looks like. So what we have is these values off to the side now make sense. So this beam here, the center of mass, is located right there, and that connects up as the center of load for the next object. That object's center of mass is partway between its own center of mass and its load center of mass, and that becomes the center of load for the rocket engine. The rocket engine's center is partway between its center of load and its center of mass. Pink Hair says, what's up with the socket wrench? Nebula, I'm testing out some things. The only way that this game makes sense is if it takes place in a debris field. So I just mocked up a quick little debris field. Obviously, the particle debris are going to be in the distance or are going to be too small to be physics objects. These are just kind of a stand-in for the moment. Why are we moving? We do seem to be moving. That's odd. Are we stuck inside something? Oh, I accidentally added in all of the things that didn't need to be added in, didn't I? No, they're not part of my ship. So what was with the weird physics? Oh, is that just a camera trick? Why are the particles not moving? Because I put them inside the ship. All right, another visual bug. But since it can only really take place in a debris field, I'm mocking up the debris field early. In the long run, it's going to be kind of like a roguelike sort of thing. Think of a tiled system like the rooms in Spelunky, only in 3D and in space. And it's all going to be about debris. And the reason for that is because debris is something that we can move around pretty easily given the speeds and control levels we're looking at. If it was going to be in deep space all the time, there wouldn't be very much compelling physics going on. And if it was going to be in local space all the time, you know, if it was going to be super cramped all the time, it would also be a little bit annoying. Having a match between the two makes it so that you can build different sizes of ships with different speeds and feel pretty good about it. One of the things we have to do is start to calculate out things like when you press WSAD, those are strafes. And right now those aren't implemented, as you can see. We'll probably be doing those in the next session. I want to finish up the physics in this session. We finish up the compressive physics. Everything right now is strong enough that we're not taking any compressive damage, but we are taking plenty of shearing damage. Unfortunately for us, the shearing damage isn't currently being calculated with any sort of vigor. So what we're going to do... Is that the ship? Why are we zoomed so far out? So what we're going to do is we're going to calculate out that stuff. But you can see that what we've got here is these are skewing as we turn the ship. So really what we need are ship local systems rather than world local systems. So one of the things we're going to need to do is to change all of that stuff into a ship-centric visual. And to do that, we can just take these load offsets and draw them as relative to our transform. I'm not sure that that's going to matter so much though, because these are just debug. I'm not going to worry too much about them. I just have to remember that those are not exactly right. The other thing we need to do, however, is take our engine vector and put it into ship space rather than leaving it in world space. So in order to do that, when we are determining here in update, we get this generated force, this frame, and we divide it by our total mass. We're going to want to put it into ship space. And we do that by simply converting it into, based on our transform dot inverse, transform from world into local, exactly so, total force. And that'll give us a ship-centric setup. And in turn, that ship-centric setup will propagate properly throughout our various offsets and center of masses. The mass graph will need to be calculated in ship local space in the long run. However, at the moment, it's calculated in frame 1 and never recalculated. So therefore, it doesn't matter. It's irrelevant whether or not it's in ship local or not, just because it never gets recalculated. But in the long run, we are going to have to put all of our locations into ship local space. And to do that, it might be best if we just go ahead and do that now. Over here in the physics components, we can get our bounds and we can get our center. You can see that we return our bounds.center. We're going to need to go over into this place here, and when we get our centers, we need to convert these centers over into ship local centers. That's not something we can do very easily because we don't know what the ship is. We're not keeping track of the quaternions here. Let me think about that for a while. For now, let's go ahead and implement shearing damage. So as you know, we've got our compressive damage done, but we don't yet have our shearing damage done. And the compressive damage is probably not actually done yet. We're probably going to need to revisit it. But the shearing damage is, it needs to be applied to all of our upwards facing connections. Now to determine whether or not our upwards facing connections, what our upwards facing connections are, we need to figure out what links go up. And to do that, we just go through all of our links and apply them to this if they are the right kind. So for each physics link, link in links, if, okay, so in order to do this, we need to know whether or not it is a connecting up link. So we already have a connecting up link calculator over here, connects upwards. We're going to have a variant of this which only does one of these at a time. So just grab that, paste it, and then delete this. And here what we can do is we can make this the outer and this the inner. But instead of having that as the inner, we can just say if connects upwards link, return true. There we are. And this is obviously not a list, it's just a link. There we are. So now we've got it so that we can pass it either one link or as many links as we would like. So here we're going to determine which of our links connect upwards. And if it is this link, then we will apply force to that link. Node dot connects up link. If node dot connects up link, then we want to apply stress to that node. So we will say link dot apply stress, and then we will pass it the amount of stress, which is this. Else, link that apply stress 0, I guess. So here's the issue. No, I guess that's fine. We don't want to do it like that. What we're going to want to do here is this should always be done regardless of whether or not the shearing force, I don't know. The problem is if our force is low, I want us to zero out the stress. Because it's supposed to, every frame, the stress, the creaking, will go back to being normal if you don't keep stressing it and destroying it. So I need to do two things. I need to have this happen regardless. So do it like this. There's no reason to have this value here. But what we'll do is we will have to add in a public void apply stress. It should actually be a public bool. Apply stress. Float stress. So what happens here is applied stress. What happens here is if it is less than 0, then our stress drops. So stress plus equals applied stress. If stress is less than 0, stress equals 0, and return. So what we want to do here, return true. We'll add in a little comment telling us what the bool is. Returns true if link survived, false if it broke. If stress is less than 0, then stress equals 0. If stress is greater than strength, return false. Return true. So basically, what we're saying is if your stress has gone over the limits of your connection, then that connection has snapped. Now what we're going to want to do is delete those connections from this list if they are if they break. So when we actually take the stress, which is here, we're going to go ahead and say if not link that apply stress blah 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 link is broken. We'll go ahead and just put in a debug for now. Debug.log warning link between link.a.name plus link.b.name this has snapped. All right, so that is our stress damage implemented, at least in terms of the code. Okay, so you can see that we've lost a couple of pieces here, which is kind of what I expected. So let's go ahead and take a look. Link between beam and rocket has snapped. Now the rocket has almost no shearing strength. So the connection between the rocket and the I-beam here is almost entirely reliant on the I-beam's connection strength. And you can see the I-beam's connection strength is surprisingly low because I forgot to change it. So what we're going to do is we're going to increase that strength because that's what will resist shearing damage. It's already being calculated out. It's not like it's has to be implemented. I've already implemented it just fine. But you can see that at this speed, we're not taking any damage. Nobody has suffered any noticeable damage. The I-beams are all intact. Everything's working. And if we update and we keep looking... Oh, that's right. We're not drawing the shearing damage yet. Only the compressive damage. So the I-beam is holding up really, really well. There. So what we have here is a couple of other values that are snapping, and that's good. Link between beam 1 and rocket has snapped. Okay, so that's the same thing that happened before. So at maximum thrust, this rocket engine is too powerful to stay connected to a single beam. I actually kind of like that. I kind of like the idea that you would need to use 2 beams, or maybe a stronger structural beam, or maybe you have to be more careful about where you put your rocket engines, because this is connected off to the side like this, so it's putting quite a bit of stress on it. Link between beam 1 and rocket has snapped. Link between beam 1 and rocket has snapped. So these beams broke real early in comparison, but after a while we did lose the armor plate and the rockets. Now, the armor plate is stapled to the rocket, as you can see. The armor plate is not something that is intended to support massive amounts of weight, and eventually it just snapped off of the rocket as well. So what you would see in this case is the rocket would break off of the I-beam, and it would remain tenuously connected to the armor plate for a short while, and then it would break off the armor plate and it would go flying off on its own. Obviously, I have not built that yet. The way that they break apart hasn't been done because I haven't finished doing the knowing when to recalculate part of things. It's fairly straightforward for me to determine whether or not an object has been isolated, at which point or a group of objects, at which point it's fairly trivial for me to break it off into its own physics object and contain it in a new physics object. But I haven't done any of that yet, and I'm not going to do it today. It has been 2 hours, and I kind of want to go back to playing Oxygen Not Included. Also, I have to think a little bit about how to make this do shearing. So, as you may have noticed, these rotors right now just kind of do whatever they want. And they just kind of float around as they see fit. What needs to happen is these rotors need to have much more complex setups. What you can see here is as I am moving around the ship, it is just kind of turning. There are no maneuvering jets. So the maneuvering jet thing hasn't been implemented, and instead I'm just arbitrarily turning. What we're going to want to do is have maneuvering jet objects, which I can then use to properly simulate maneuvering the ship up and down, left and right, changing the vector of our thrust. In theory, you could do that with a primary engine, but I'm not going to allow it because it would be arbitrarily complex, and I don't want players to get confused as to why they only have maneuvering on one axis. So what we need to do is add in maneuvering jets, and once it happens, we're going to know how much force is being applied to the rotors. Because if we are having a force being applied, so take a look at the ship here. If the maneuvering jet is firing upwards here, that means that this rotor here has a tremendous amount of torque being applied to it. As this fires upwards, the whole wing area is trying to move down. And what we're going to want to do is actually simulate that. Now, I've got that done. I've got that in terms of the math, but obviously I haven't wired anything up yet. But what I would really like to see is I would like to see these rotors responding to those sorts of events in an organic way so that you feel like you're kind of swimming through space when you use rotors. The overly locked rotor is not something I really want. In addition, we'll be able to do some rather complicated stuff where if your engine thrust is not directly on your rotor, you will see your rotor respond as the engine starts to thrust. It'll get pushed and then it'll push back, and that'll be fun. And that stuff is super cheap, like really, really cheap, because of the way I'm doing it. So that's quite nice. Right now, the primary load on the system is these debug messages. So that's fun. If we were going to, we could just hop on into our debugger, our profiler. Do I have to start over? I think I might have to start over. And take a look at our various usage here. We're getting somewhere between 60 and 120 frames per second here. And if I look at the load, it's almost all rendering. Physics accounts for a small amount of the load, but that's collision detection, not my physics. My scripts account for, well, you can't even see it, can you? Let's try it like over here where you can actually see it. My scripts only account for that little teeny bit of blue. Can you even see that little teeny bit of blue? I don't think you can. And that is all of the physics calculations and rotor and piloting calculations and rotor inverse IK, all the stuff that already exists is basically free. The only things that are costing us anything are the physics calculations and visuals, and they're not costing us very much. We're running at like between 60 and 200 frames a second. Yeah, so it's exactly as fast as my prototypes said it would be. Nice. All right, I think I'm going to stop here. There's lots of work left to do. This is going to be a much smaller game than the Galactic Line was intended to be, but it's going to be one of those things I think I can grow, which is why I'm working on it more aggressively. I think that I can turn this into the Galactic Line in the long run, but it's going to be playable far sooner, because the Galactic Line, I'd worked on it for like, what, 9 months, and it was barely moving, whereas this should be in a state where you can drive around and bounce off of things relatively quickly. And it involves two innovations that I'm really proud of, the physics engine and the control system. So I really think that it's going to be interesting. I don't know how fun it's going to be, because I don't know how fun I can make it, but it's got some stuff to it that's pretty unique and should be new and interesting. The only question in my mind is whether I can make it juicy enough, whether you can tell what's going on in your ship. So I need to have all sorts of feedback. I need to have creaking and dust particles and vibration and all sorts of stuff like that. So it's going to be, that's the problem with this particular prototype. It's going to be largely polish at the end. It's like, it's not going to be something where at the beginning it's terribly cool, because you're not going to have enough insight into what's going on in your ship. So you're going to be building something or flying something around, and then suddenly your wing will go flying off, and you'll be like, why did that happen? And it's like, well, because the stress finally built up. But I didn't warn you that the stress was building up, because I didn't have a visual for that. Or if I did have a visual, it wasn't one you noticed, that sort of stuff. So there's lots of polish that has to go into this in order to make it feel correct. Anyway, that's that. Hope you have a good weekend, what's left of it, and I'm going to sign off. Let me know if you have any questions or comments. I'll read the chat for another 10 minutes or so, and thanks for stopping by, everybody. Oh, where is this stop button?